Disaster refers to any unexpected event that causes considerable harm to the population. A disaster comes with no discrimination. It is equally unexpected in its entirety, but why is that different groups are affected in different ways? Why does the magnitude of losses vary from one place to another? An earthquake occurring at one place takes huge toll of life and property, while another earthquake of the same magnitude in a different place causes no such harm. Why does such a difference occur? The answer lies in how capacitative the population is. If a community has been well equipped with all the resources needed to safeguard itself from the disaster and to help in easy recovery, the impact of the disaster would be far less than the one devoid of such disasters. These supportive resources are referred to as capacities. Similarly, a few communities recover easily from disaster situations, while for a few recovery becomes highly difficult. To get out of the damages and trauma caused of a disaster is no easy joke, but if the rehabilitation and long-term reconstruction measures taken are effective, recovery becomes less difficult. In this lesson, the learner will have an exposure to the concepts of capacity building, rehabilitation measures and long-term reconstruction activities to be carried out post-disaster situations. Objectives: at the end of this lesson, the learner will get familiarized with the concept of capacity building and the need and means for capacity building, will understand the need for effective rehabilitation measures, will know the ways and means to promising long-term reconstruction and shall be able to identify the pitfalls in the recovery process and come up with better ways to post-disaster management. Disaster management cycle. Disasters, as we all know, are unexpected, but when managed effectively, it is evident that the adverse impacts that disasters cause can be controlled to a certain extent. Disaster management in general involves the following phases: mitigation, involving capacity building and awareness; preparation, involving pre-impact assessment and early detection response, which involves emergency and relief; and recovery, involving rehabilitation and reconstruction. Disaster management cycle: 1 is mitigation, 2 is preparation, 3 is recovery and response. In mitigation, there is capacity building and awareness; in preparation, pre-impact and early detection; in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction; in response, emergency and relief. Both mitigation and recovery, in one way or the other, revolve around reducing the risks that disaster causes. The former is about reducing the risks before a disaster occurs, and the latter is all about reducing the severity of risks that disasters have already caused. In this lesson, we will learn both about mitigation through capacity building and recovery through rehabilitation and reconstruction. Capacity. Capacity refers to the ability of people, organization and society to successfully handle and manage their affairs. It is the totality of strengths, abilities and resources available within a community that are of due help in better handling their issues and problems and in achieving their agreed goals. It is the overall ability to effectively handle and manage diverse situations and successfully move towards development. Capacities with respect to disaster management can take up any of the following 3 forms: an enabling environment, organizational level capacities, individual level capacities. An enabling environment. An enabling environment is a broader and inclusive term comprising of individuals, organizations, institutions and community at large. An enabling environment acts as a facilitating factor to the individual and the community to better cope with the situation. Capacities falling under this category include government policies and legislations, legal framework, institutional and political setup, governance and leadership, social norms and values, etc. The organization level capacities pertain to the internal policies, systems and strategies and the frameworks within which organizations function, so as to better cater to the needs and obligations of individuals. The individual level capacities refer to the skills, knowledge, strengths and attributes that an individual has that would be of help any time in the future. Each person born on earth is unique in his her own way. Not all individuals are the same. They vary in personalities, attitude, skills, interest, economy, knowledge, socio-cultural factors, etc. The similarities and differences together decide and endow how a person performs at home, work, and in the community. Capacities at this level are acquired through formal education, life experiences, coaching, mentoring, and practice. The above said levels of capacities coexist at all times. It is necessary to understand them together in order to put them into better use. Enabling environment, the individual, the organization. Types of capacities. Capacities are of two major categories: functional capacities, technical capacities. These two types are interlinked yet distinct. Functional capacities. Functional capacities are the management capacities that are needed to formulate and implement policies, strategies, and projects. Functional capacities are of 5 categories: capacity to engage stakeholders, capacity to assess situations, capacity to formulate policies, capacity to budget, capacity to evaluate. Technical capacities are those that are needed and sector based. In order to know who needs what and for what purpose, it is essential to understand these capacities. Capacity building. Capacity building is the process through which individuals and communities obtain and strengthen their capacities so as to set and achieve their own development objectives over time. It includes the activities, strategies, and methodologies that would be of help to organizations, groups, and individuals to improve their performance towards the achievement of their desired objectives. It involves putting the available resources into optimal use so as to achieve the desired ends. It is the phenomenon of unleashing the strengths and potentials. It is the process by which communities put together their knowledge and skill towards overcoming difficult situations in the best possible way. Capacity building is dynamic and multidimensional. It is both a process and an outcome. It is a long term and continuous process. It is more of creating an enabling and facilitative environment that provides for all the resources needed to prevent or at least mitigate disasters and their consequences. Stages in capacity building process. In general, capacity development or the capacity enhancement involves 4 stages. 1 is analysis, 2 creation, 3 utility, and 4 retention. Analysis. Analysis is the first phase of capacity building. It is the process wherein the resources that are available in the community are checked in par with the resources that are actually needed to mitigate the anticipated hazard. Shortage of resources is identified and the ways to procure these resources are analyzed. Also, analysis phase involves a fundamental ground evaluation of the area so as to obtain all the necessary information needed regarding the community characteristics. The information so collected will be used at the time of disasters in various ways. Creation. The analysis phase will give us an understanding of the resources available and those in short. The creation phase involves the process wherein the lagging resources are made available to the community, the individual, and the environment in order that they are put to the maximum utility so as to safeguard themselves from hazardous situations. This phase is actually capacity building process. The government has a significant role to play as it holds the responsibility and duty of making all the essential resources readily available to their citizens when in need. Utility. This is where the resources are put to use in reality. After the essential resources have been made available, it is the responsibility of the receiver to make optimum use of them in the best possible way. Utility refers to how much the available resources have been put to use. In other words, it refers to how useful the resources have been or what purpose they have served to the community. Retention and restoration. Capacity building is a never ending cycle. Retention and restoration can be considered to be both the first and the last phase of disaster management. Retention refers to what extent the resources or capacities have been safeguarded after having been put to optimum utility, while restoration defines the ability of the community to bring back to life the lost used capacities. Thus, these four phases together constitute what we refer to as capacity building in disaster management. Stakeholders in capacity building. Stakeholder refers to the individual or a group who which is directly indirectly involved in a similar activity owing to their common interests. Capacity development necessitates the participation and involvement of a wider group ranging from the national and local government to the neighborhood community. They are referred to as stakeholders owing to their common interests towards mitigating the disaster and coping successfully from the situation. The important stakeholders with reference to capacity building are national and local government, international organizations like the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, local community, academicians and professionals, researchers, emergency relief workforce, disaster management authority, etc. Each party has a different role to play. For instance, researchers come up with innovations relating to disasters. The government formulates policies, legislations and frameworks relating to disasters, while the NGOs and emergency workforce come for the immediate relief of the affected. Thus, each of the stakeholders work with different objectives and in different ways, but their interest or the ultimatum lies in protecting and safeguarding the community from disaster risks. Enlist the various stakeholders involved in capacity building for disaster management. The government, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, the local community, academicians, research and policy makers, armed forces, emergency task forces and others. Core domains in capacity building. Before capacity building activities are performed, it becomes essential to know what capacities are needed, for whom and why. The resource requirements vary from person to person and time to time. Institutional strengthening. Institutions refer to the policy frameworks and systems that countries have in place to manage their development activities, inclusive of disaster risk reduction. Policies shall aim both at reducing the risks of disaster and effective recovery post disasters. Efficient policy planning would be of great help in emergency circumstances like disasters. Institutional strengthening shall include activities like reform strategies, creation and reformations of offices working for disaster risk reduction, timely revision of legislations, partnership and twinning agreements between various institutions of similar interests, capacitative relief measures, etc. In a country like ours, the government has a very significant role to play in all matters. Only when policies are strong, activities carried alongside would be effective. One good example of institutional strengthening is the formulation of the National Policy for Disaster Management. This policy sets the guidelines for what role each stakeholder has to play and when paving way for effective disaster management. Leadership. Leadership in this context is not about taking authority or leading the activity. It is all about envisioning the objectives and improved competence and integrity towards the activity performed. Leadership here may be formal or informal, and it is usually multi-leveled. In general, capacity building is aimed at equipping individuals and communities with all that they need to effectively handle hazardous situations and enhancing their leadership capacity. Leadership domain revolves around targeted development programs, brokering partnerships, and developing competent and supporting individuals who can efficiently champion for the cause and act as change agents in the matters thereof. Leadership activities generally target the youth population, voluntary organizations, community leaders, etc. Knowledge. Knowledge is an important capacity. When the individual and the community have sufficient knowledge of the disaster, its onset and anticipated consequences, it becomes way too easier to handle emergency situations. Knowledge equipment may involve awareness generation, education and training, coaching and mentoring on matters thereof. For instance, Mock firefighting is a knowledge enhancement program whereby individuals and communities get to know how fire breaks up and how to handle the situation effectively. It is increasingly important that the training given is need based so as to ensure its maximum utility. These knowledge oriented capacity building activities are primarily aimed at equipping the beneficiaries with a sufficient understanding of how to effectively put the available resources into use. Accountability. Accountability refers to the extent to which stakeholders and duty bearers deliver their obligations. Every right holder is entitled with certain responsibilities and obligations. For instance, the government is held responsible for framing efficient policies and legislations, while the health department is entitled to providing immediate and timely care and support to the affected during the hazard. Accountability is a self-monitoring phenomenon wherein each duty bearer ensures whether the responsibilities held are delivered properly to those in need. The community is accountable to the state and vice versa. So are the donors and the countries. In this sense, accountability in capacity building shall include the constitution of arbitration agencies that are obliged to monitor the activities of various wings, setting up a sound legal framework, creating coalition and networks with public sectors, etc. Recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. Natural disasters, wars, development projects and all other man-made disasters cause considerable damages to life, property and socio-cultural systems. The community gets taken aback by many decades as a consequence of these adversities. They end up in a lot of physical, social and economic hardships, curtailing the community from getting back to the base position set aside rising in par with the nation. In order to design an effective response strategy, it becomes essential to have a thorough understanding of the root cause of the disaster and the anticipated long-term consequences of the catastrophe. Let us consider an earthquake situation. In general, during an earthquake, a large-scale destruction of infrastructure happens. Why? This is mainly due to the lack of sturdy constructions, insufficient knowledge of efficient construction strategies and technological considerations for a safer building. This is also coupled with misplaced priorities, more money being spent on decorative facades than on safer buildings. Also, poverty is one significant factor contributing to the problem. For the poorer population, one complete meal becomes more important than safer household. Hence, the root cause diversifies to various aspects. What are the immediate consequences? Very obviously, loss of life, property and infrastructure. The long-term consequences: increased vulnerability to elements, loss of livelihood, increased poverty, economic recession, malnutrition, outmigration, enhanced social disparities, strife, etc. Hence, recovery post an earthquake should have its ultimatum in addressing the root cause and the long-term consequences. Post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. Post-disaster response involves the following stages: relief immediately after the casualty. It usually lasts for 24 hours to 3 months. It caters to the immediate needs of the affected, ranging from food, water, shelter and medical assistance. Reconstruction follows relief and lasts for up to 2 years. It is aimed at rebuilding the basic infrastructure and shelter so as to pave way for fresh beginning. Rehabilitation is a long-term process involving reinstating the lost livelihoods, improving economic opportunities, reducing vulnerabilities and enhancing capacities. Disaster response shall always take a holistic approach. It shall not be looked upon as a half empty bottle, but as half full. It shall not be looked to as a tremendous loss, but as an opportunity that has been offered again, an opportunity for sustainable development, an opportunity to set systems, technologies and process in place so as to improve the quality of life. Reconstruction involves partial and complete shifting or rebuilding of essential physical infrastructure so as to reduce vulnerability and enabling the affected to get back to their feet. This paves way for long-term rehabilitation as well. Reconstruction addresses the immediate consequences of the hazard, while rehabilitation is mainly concerned with the root cause and long-term consequences of the hazard. For sustainable growth and development to be achieved, reconstruction alone will not be sufficient. It demands long-term intervention focusing primarily on improved quality of life and reduced vulnerability. These interventions shall also encompass improved building practices, sanitation and sewerage, rainwater harvesting, improved land and water management, etc. Therefore, reconstruction and rehabilitation shall be in continuum with restoration activities. Let us think the other way around. Is it enough to apply a holistic approach only? Is time and speed of application really a matter of concern? What if a holistic response activity is done several weeks after disaster incidents? Timely and speedy action is as important as a holistic approach to be taken. We shall not negate fast response at any time. Several evidences show that when timely assistance is not rendered, communities revert back to their original unsustainable practices. For instance, in an earthquake affected community, if necessary assistance is not furnished immediately after the disaster, the community attempts to get back to their normal living through construction of unsafe and unplanned houses. This would in turn make them increasingly vulnerable to any disaster of the same sort in the future. From reconstruction to rehabilitation, reconstruction is either immediately followed by rehabilitation or rehabilitation followed by reconstruction. It is the first step towards restoring and upgrading the local habitat. Reconstruction activities introduce sound infrastructure and building practices, sustainable technologies to the local community, and the effective management of their capacities. Rehabilitation aims at re-establishing people's lives through awareness generation, creating new economic opportunities, and capacity building through interface between several external agencies working for the same purpose. Steps involved in rehabilitation and reconstruction. The following are the series of steps involved in rehabilitation and reconstruction. Nature and scope of the disaster. Before prioritizing the areas of reconstruction and rehabilitation, the following aspects relating to the disaster need to be studied. Nature of the disaster. Disasters are of various types. The damages that they cause also vary significantly. Before proceeding any further, attempts shall be made to identify the nature of the disaster and the potential damages it is expected to cause to the individuals and the community at large. This fundamental understanding would be of great help in coming up with effective recovery plans. Scale of damages caused. A proper assessment of the damages shall be done before getting into action. The primary and ancillary areas affected shall be identified. Assessments shall be done with respect to the systems and elements affected. These damages shall be prioritized and attempts shall be made to recover them in the order of priorities. Thus, the different areas affected and the extent of damage shall be identified and prioritized. These priorities act as templates for future actions. Location of event. In general, restoration activities are context specific. The same disaster will have different impacts in different localities. The vulnerability levels also vary from place to place. For instance, a typhoon might cause a landslide in one area and a storm surge in the other. Thus, the locality has a significant role to play with respect to rehabilitation and reconstruction. Nature of losses. It shall also be identified whether the losses are tangible or intangible. Resulting needs. A systematic need assessment shall be done in the community to identify the immediate and long-term needs of them post the disaster. Based on the community requirements, these needs shall be prioritized and addressed to in the same order. Available resources. Effective community leadership can be involved in the identification of the existing resources and resource gaps. These resource gaps would be of great help in getting to know what exactly the requirements of the community are and where the resources lie in pertinence to these needs. Political commitment and actors involved in recovery. Following resource mapping, the extent and nature of political involvement in the community needs to be identified. Community leadership shall act as an effective tool in getting to know the various community counterparts that play significant roles in rehabilitation and recovery. This understanding would be of great use in putting them to effective use for better recovery. Recovery and rehabilitation. Following need assessment and prioritizing of needs and recovery and rehabilitation, they usually happen from 1 week to 1 month after the disaster, involving the restoration of basic services, infrastructure and livelihood. This phase not only aims at restoring what existed previously, but also setting them at a better state, paving way for efficient rehabilitation. This shall be referred to as the build back better principle. In order that these activities are effective, it becomes essential to know the community felt needs. This shall be achieved through consulting with the affected community before any such activity is undertaken. Reconstruction and development. Reconstruction is the permanent construction or restoration of severely affected physical infrastructure and services and revitalization of economy. Reconstruction shall always be fully in coherence with the long term development objectives and in such a way that efficient mitigation of disasters is achieved in the near future. Post disaster rehabilitation and reconstruction shall involve damage assessment, disposal of debris, town planning, relocation, capacity building and mitigation and grievance redressal. Both rehabilitation and reconstruction shall be focused on the future and on building a better atmosphere for sustenance. Thus, it can be concluded that capacity building, rehabilitation and reconstruction all focus on mitigating disaster risks and building a better environment for the future. Summary. Capacity refers to the ability of the people, organization and society to successfully handle and manage their affairs. Capacity building is the process through which individuals and communities obtain and strengthen their capacities so as to set and achieve their own development objectives over time. It includes the activities, the strategies and methodologies that would be of help to organizations, groups and individuals to improve their performance towards the achievement of their desired objectives. Post disaster response involves the following stages. A. Relief immediately after the casualty. It usually lasts for 24 hours to 3 months. It caters to the immediate needs of the affected, ranging from food, water, shelter and medical assistance. B. Reconstruction follows relief and lasts for 2 years. It is aimed at rebuilding the basic infrastructure and shelter so as to pave way for a fresh beginning. C. Rehabilitation is a long-term process involving reinstating lost livelihoods, improving economic opportunities, reducing vulnerabilities and enhancing capacities.